So, welcome in France, Mr. Baxter.
Thank you.
We are happy to meet you here in Zone Franche for a quiet talk about your work and the universes that you invented. At first, I want to speak with you about flux, which is for us a discovery. Because for you it's an old novel,
Yes.
But for us in France, this book is something totally new. We are just discovering Jura and our strange, for us humans, life. How did you get this idea about these microscopic human-like beings like you do?
I think there's two answers. One is a very sort of deep and old answer, which is one of my favourite pieces of science fiction from when I was a boy. Was a story called Surface Tension by James Blish, and it's about microscopic humans, humans shrunk down to live in a puddle on a nearly arid planet. You know, spaceship crash lands, and they can't. There's just puddles and small lakes, so they shrink the humans down, and there they are battling in a microscopic world and building wooden spaceships an inch long. And it was just a wonderful vision. I think that always, the miniaturization thing stayed in my mind. So that, but then reading somewhere about the interior of neutron stars, I knew that Robert Forward had done a book called Dragon's Egg about creatures on the surface of a neutron star. But then I read about the interior of neutron stars, which have a great deal of structure, you know, the crust and the layers within, all with different physical properties. And I started imagining life in there. There are energy flows, and so there could be life. And then, you know, it occurred to me to have humans in there in some way, just to make it. I thought it would be too strange to have exotic creatures in an exotic environment, but humans, or adapted humans, human form at least, could work. So that was the basic idea. It was all within the structure of my Zeely universe, where mankind is spreading across the galaxy. And these creatures are actually weapons, really. They're sent in there to weaponize the star. And so that was the essential story. But I do remember, you can imagine the research was difficult because, I mean, there are many models of what's inside a neutron star for a start. So I had to come up with something that was consistent and not contradictory of any of the science, but interesting as well. And I did masses and masses of research, but it really came to a focus in the first scene when I actually had to write down what Jura. I think this first scene is she wakes up and looks around, and what does she see? And that it makes all the research come together. You know, what colour is this thing? How big is the flux line over there? And so on.
Yes, so as you say, you put your characters in what seems to be the most hostile environments that ever exist.
Yeah.
So, did you make Jura live with this awful danger always on her head? Do you want them to have to struggle to survive? Or?
Oh yes, I think that's essential to all fiction. You know, you have a setting like that. But the key to a story is who has a problem, who has a fight to resolve, who has a need to survive or something. So yes, give them a problem immediately as far as possible, because then the problem, their struggle to resolve the problem will take them to where you want them to go, to see the city in there, for instance, and eventually to uncover the secret of their universe, their enclosed universe. Oh, so that was a deliberate plot device. You know, I think that's roughly the way I work personally. Come up with some kind of setting, a rough idea of the environment the story's going to be set in, but then find somebody with a real problem with that environment. Another example of that, just to go off the subject of flux slightly, is a slightly later novel, Voyage, about near future, recent past missions to Mars. So I did all the research about how the technology would have worked, the rocket ships and so on. But who has a problem with that? Well, it's somebody who wants to be the first person on Mars who's got the most difficulty. It's a scientist, for a start, and all the NASA astronauts were pilots, and a woman, because in the 60s and the 70s, women astronauts were not accepted by NASA. So you couldn't have more of a struggle for her, you know, than the position I put her in. But her struggle is to break through all the barriers, lets the reader see, you know, the nature of that particular universe. So that's my basic technique. Find somebody with a real problem and let the story go from there.
Yes, like you said, in your novels, we find a kind of emergency, often up to a point of no return. In flood, for example, the sudden climatic disaster which threatens the life, or in Moonseed, the earth is literally going to dissolve by the action of a lunar rock.
Yeah.
In the Manifold trilogy, it is our distant future which is threatened against the risk of the extinction of life, and so on in your novels.
Yeah.
Why do you wish to give this emergency feeling, as if man needed an awareness of his fragility to overcome it?
Yeah, that's it really. It's I think one key element of science fiction is the sense that the here and now is only like a little island of stability, if it's stable at all. You know, the past was very different, the future will be very different. Even if we stay on Earth, you know, there was an ice age in the human past. There'll be another ice age in the future, and so on. So dramatising that in these imaginary or half-real worlds, like in Flood, is a way of driving that home. In my first novel, actually, Raft, or Gravité in French, it's a different universe, a high-gravity universe, and the humans stranded there in this nebula of life-giving air, but that's becoming exhausted. So again, you have a world, really, which is reaching the end of its cycle, and they have to find a way out. Maybe that's the most fundamental human challenge, you know, to survive climate changes and geological changes and asteroid impacts and all the other things that the universe throws at us. But in fiction, I think it's good to take it to an extreme, so you could see extremes of human reaction and so on. So Flood is semi-realistic, I would say, because if the ice caps melted, Greenland and Antarctica, we'd get 60, 70, 80 metres worth of sea level rise, which would be enough to wipe out Paris and London, but it wouldn't cover the mountains. So I could have stopped the novel there about a third of the way in, you know, and had a relatively realistic disaster novel. But it's more interesting for the imagery, just to push it on, find more sources of water and have the mountains covered, the whole earth become the ocean, and then humans surviving on rafts and so on. So pushing it to the limit beyond the scientifically plausible really is a good technique, even in a reasonably realistic novel. With that novel, because it's so realistically grounded in the first third or so, this is what would happen if London went under, you know. Hopefully, it stays plausible and real for the reader as it continues to go on and on. I do try to anchor it in reality, though, all these scenarios. And in Flood, there are some theories that there's a great deal of water trapped in the rocks of the mantle, you know, under the crust of the earth, 5 times as much as in the oceans. And if that was all released, that would be enough to cover the mountains. So I have no idea how it could be released and what the real consequences would be, but at least it's there, you know. So I use that number 5 times as much, just able to cover the oceans, and so that worked too. There's some scientific plausibility there. But yes, I think to push things to the extreme is one technique in science fiction. And you mentioned time, for instance, is another one where the universe itself is destroyed by an unimaginable disaster, or almost a shockwave that crosses the universe at the speed of light. You don't even know it's coming before it hits you. And yet that's scientifically plausible in a way. So yes, to push people to the absolute limit, you know, it gives you it's like looking for the boundary of the frame of reality in which we live.
Okay. In Voyage, you would have liked modifying our political past to allow a strong development of the space exploration.
Yes.
And in Evolution, you are interested in what made the current humanity, our biological evolution. And in the Manifold trilogy, you try to plan at the same time various scenarios of evolution of the humanity in distant future. We feel in the reading of your novels this strong notion of evolution, kind of milestones for the human race, which does not have to miss the boat at some moments of its history. According to you, can science fiction novels help us by the analysis they bring in choosing a way for our future?
Well, perhaps just by the basic raising of awareness, you know, that we evolve from creatures very different from us, and why will we not evolve into creatures very different from us again? That's a trope that goes back to H.G. Wells, of course. And then on a smaller scale, as in evolution, in some other sections in evolution, historical scales, you can look at how humanity survives the geological epochs and how we may not survive the next epoch and so forth on a smaller scale. In my latest series of novels, which not yet published in French, Northland, this is about a different outcome from the Ice Age, a different pattern of continents and landscapes. So different history again, showing how, not particularly catastrophic, you know, how geography affects culture, and therefore, you know, the destinies of us all. So yes, we're shaped by these forces, it seems to me, working on many different scales of space and time, you know, all leading us to the point that we are now. But I guess with Voyage, the turning point of Voyage was President Kennedy being shot and surviving. So this is the other extreme of history changing. It's the individual, the effect of an individual living or dying on a great current of history. I wanted Voyage to be as realistic as possible, so I wanted the smallest change I could think of that was still dramatic, that would have enabled NASA to keep the momentum up and go on to Mars. And it seemed to me, Kennedy, he gets shot, but he survives. He's out of office, so many events like Vietnam War would have unfolded as in art history, but he survives and is a kind of conscience of the space race. And he provides just enough political impetus to have them make different choices after the Apollo Moon program and go on. But I think, yes, certainly individuals do change history to a greater or lesser degree. Alexander the Great, for instance, I mean, truly founded the Greek diaspora on which the Roman Empire was based, on which all our modern nations in Europe are based, and so forth. And certainly he was a pretty unique individual. But I suspect on the longer time scales, it must be climatic forces, geological forces, and maybe if we escape from the Earth into space, then there's a cosmic destiny out there. We'll spread and scatter and change, and, you know, in a kind of unimaginable way, I suspect. But again, it's the environment that we're spreading into. Olaf Stapledon, great British writer of visionary SF, believed that he described colonising the planets and so on, and he directly addressed the question, what's the point of colonising Mars or colonising Venus? And he said it's to find all the ways that humans can express themselves, explore all the potentiality of humankind, all the things we can be and can do, and as many different environments as possible. So maybe space is a great liberation.